CEO finds ex-fiancée who left him at altar begging. Her desperate proposal shocks him. "You have exactly 36 hours to convince immigration that we're madly in love," Malcolm said, his voice cutting through the tension in Attorney Varney's office. Octavia's hands trembled as she stared at the man whose heart she'd shattered 3 years ago, the same man now offering her everything she'd walked away from. "Can you do that, Octavia? Can you pretend you never left me at the altar?" The leather chair beneath Octavia felt like quicksand as she studied Malcolm Wimberly's face. 3 years had sharpened his features, carved deeper lines around those intense dark eyes that once looked at her like she held the universe in her palms. Now they held nothing but cold calculation. His tall, lean frame filled out his tailored charcoal suit perfectly, every detail screaming success, from his platinum watch to the confident way he held his shoulders. But she remembered when those same hands shook as he slid an engagement ring onto her finger. Attorney Varney cleared his throat, breaking the suffocating silence. "Mr. Wimberly, Miss Brock, I understand this situation is complicated, but Immigration Services has denied Malcolm's visa renewal due to clerical errors in his application. Without proof of legitimate marriage to a United States citizen within 36 hours, he faces immediate deportation." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "My company's $50 million international expansion depends on my physical presence in London next week. 300 jobs hang in the balance." Octavia's breath caught as familiar determination blazed in his eyes. She'd watched that same fire when he built Nexus Technologies from nothing, working 18-hour days in a cramped office above a coffee shop. Now he commanded a tech empire from a glass tower overlooking the city, but success hadn't softened him. If anything, it had forged him into something harder, more unreachable. "The marriage of convenience is your only option," Attorney Varney continued, sliding documents across his mahogany desk. "Miss Brock has agreed to the arrangement in exchange for—" He glanced at Octavia meaningfully. "In exchange for helping with my father's medical bills," Octavia finished quietly, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "His heart surgery can't wait." Malcolm's expression flickered, the first crack in his armor. "Your father is none of your concern anymore," she cut him off, though her tone lacked conviction. The office smelled of leather and desperation, expensive cologne mixing with the floral perfume Octavia still wore. Jasmine and vanilla, the same scent that used to make Malcolm bury his face in her neck and whisper promises against her skin. She caught him inhaling sharply and knew he remembered too. Attorney Varney spread the papers like tarot cards predicting their future. "You'll need to live together, maintain the appearance of a loving relationship, and pass immigration scrutiny. They'll interview friends, family, examine your shared history." "We have shared history," Malcolm said coldly. "Just not the kind that ends in happily ever after." Octavia flinched. The night she left still haunted her dreams. Malcolm in his tuxedo, standing at the altar while 300 guests whispered and pointed. Her wedding dress abandoned in a hotel room along with every dream they'd built together. She disappeared like smoke, leaving only a letter explaining nothing and apologizing for everything. "The arrangement is purely business," Attorney Varney emphasized. 12 months minimum to satisfy immigration requirements. After that, quiet divorce, sealed records. No one need ever know the marriage wasn't genuine from the beginning. But Octavia's treacherous heart knew better. Nothing about Malcolm Wimberly had ever been purely business for her. Even now, sitting 3 feet away in professional distance, her body remembered the weight of his hands, the taste of his mouth, the way he used to trace patterns on her skin while she fell asleep. "I need to review the financial arrangements," Malcolm said, his tone crisp as winter air. "Octavia's compensation, medical bill coverage, legal protections." "Of course." Attorney Varney handed him a folder thick with contracts. "Miss Brock will need to move into your residence immediately. Immigration may conduct surprise visits." The thought of living in Malcolm's space again made Octavia's chest tighten. She remembered his old apartment, books scattered everywhere, coffee rings on wooden tables, photographs of them laughing pinned to a corkboard by the kitchen. Nothing like the sterile penthouse he probably inhabited now, all glass and steel and no heart. "Are we clear on the terms?" Malcolm asked, his pen hovering over the signature line. 12 months, separate bedrooms, minimal interaction outside required appearances? Octavia nodded, though her throat felt raw. Crystal clear. As she signed her name beside his, their hands brushed, reaching for the same document. The contact burned like touching a live wire, sending sparks racing up her arm. Malcolm jerked his hand back as if she'd shocked him, but not before she caught the flash of longing that crossed his features. Excellent, Attorney Varney beamed, oblivious to the electricity crackling between his clients. I'll file the marriage certificate immediately. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Wimberly. The words hit Octavia like a physical blow. Mrs. Wimberly, the name she'd dreamed of taking, practiced writing in margins of notebooks like a lovesick teenager. Now it felt like wearing clothes that no longer fit. They gathered their belongings in awkward silence, the weight of their decision settling around them like fog. In the elevator, Malcolm pressed the parking garage button with more force than necessary. This doesn't change anything between us, he said, without looking at her. I know, but her voice betrayed the lie. Everything had already changed the moment she'd walked back into his world. The parking garage's concrete walls echoed with their footsteps as they approached Malcolm's sleek black Tesla. Octavia remembered his old Honda with the broken air conditioning and radio stuck on classical music. Success had upgraded everything about his life, except, apparently, his taste in women seeking green cards. We need to discuss our story, Malcolm said, remote unlocking the car. Immigration will want details about our reconciliation. Simple. We reconnected recently through mutual friends, realized we'd both grown, decided to try again. Malcolm's eyes flashed dangerously. Absolutely not. We tell the truth about our history and claim we've been quietly working through our issues. That's insane. Why would we advertise that I left you at the altar? Because hiding it makes us look like liars. Immigration investigates everything, Octavia. They'll discover our engagement, the canceled wedding, the 3-year gap. Better to control the narrative than get caught covering it up. She pressed her hand against his chest without thinking, feeling his heart race beneath her palm. Malcolm, please, I can't relive that night in front of strangers. The contact made them both freeze. His chest rose and fell rapidly under her touch, and for a moment, 3 years collapsed into nothing. They were just Malcolm and Octavia again, young and in love and believing they could conquer the world together. Then a car alarm shrieked through the garage, shattering the spell. Octavia jerked her hand away, cheeks burning with embarrassment. Get in the car, Malcolm said roughly. The drive to his penthouse passed in loaded silence. Seattle's skyline glittered through the windows, familiar yet strange after 3 years of avoiding the neighborhoods they'd once explored together. Every street corner held memories. The coffee shop where they had had their first date, the bookstore where he'd proposed between the poetry and philosophy sections, the church where she'd destroyed both their lives. Malcolm's building rose like a glass monument to his success. The doorman nodded respectfully as they entered the marble lobby, crystal chandeliers casting rainbow prisms across polished floors. This wasn't the man who used to eat cereal for dinner because he'd spent his last $20 on flowers for her. 30th floor, he said unnecessarily as the elevator climbed. His penthouse door opened to reveal a space that belonged in architectural magazines, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, minimalist furniture in shades of gray and white, abstract art that said nothing about the man who lived there. It was beautiful, expensive, and utterly soulless. The guest room is down the hall, Malcolm said, loosening his tie. Private bathroom, separate entrance if you need privacy. Octavia's heart clenched. She'd expected separate bedrooms, but the clinical way he discussed their living arrangements felt like ice water on old wounds. They were strangers now, sharing space out of necessity rather than love. Malcolm, she turned to face him, searching his features for some trace of the man who used to hold her like she might disappear. Are we really going to do this? Pretend to be married while treating each other like roommates? Something flickered in his dark eyes, pain, longing, regret, but his voice remained steady. What alternative do we have? We're not the same people we were 3 years ago, Octavia. We can't go back to what we had. I know that. She struggled to find words for the ache in her chest. I don't want to hurt you again. Malcolm's laugh held no warmth. You can't hurt someone who's learned not to feel. But even as he said it, Octavia caught the lie. His fingers drummed against his thigh the way they always did when he was fighting emotion. Some things never changed, no matter how much armor a person built around their heart. Have you ever had to face someone who broke your heart when you needed them most? Tell me your story in the comments, let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if this tension is already pulling at your heartstrings. The guest room was as impersonal as the rest of the penthouse. White walls, expensive furniture, no photographs or personal touches. Octavia set her suitcase on the pristine bedspread and wondered how she'd survived 12 months in this beautiful prison. A soft knock interrupted her unpacking. Malcolm stood in the doorway holding a steaming mug, and for a moment, time folded backward. He'd brought her tea every night when they lived together, Earl Grey with honey and cream, served in a chipped blue cup they'd bought at a thrift store. This mug was elegant bone china, probably worth more than their old entire dish collection, but the gesture remained achingly familiar. "Thank you," she whispered, accepting the tea with trembling fingers. Their hands brushed as he passed her the mug, and this time, neither pulled away immediately. His thumb traced across her knuckles, so light she might have imagined it, but the touch sent warmth spiraling through her body. "You still drink it the same way," he murmured. "Some things never change." Their eyes met and held, 3 years of unspoken words stretching between them like a bridge neither dared cross. Octavia's chest tightened with the familiar ache of loving someone she couldn't have, while Malcolm's careful mask slipped just enough to reveal the hurt he'd been carrying. "I should let you rest," he said finally, stepping back. "Tomorrow we'll start preparing for the immigration interview." But he lingered in the doorway, drinking in the sight of her like a man who'd been starving. Octavia set down her tea and moved closer, drawn by some invisible thread that still connected them despite everything. "Malcolm, His phone buzzed with an urgent ringtone, breaking the moment. Malcolm glanced at the screen, and his expression hardened back into business mode. "Emergency call from London. We'll continue this tomorrow." He disappeared down the hallway, leaving Octavia alone with her regrets and the lingering scent of his cologne. Through the guest room window, Seattle's lights twinkled like earthbound stars, beautiful and distant as the love she'd thrown away. She pulled her suitcase closer and began unpacking the remnants of her life, wondering if 36 hours would be enough time to convince immigration they were madly in love, when she could barely convince herself they could coexist peacefully. But as she hung her dresses in Malcolm's guest room closet, Octavia's fingers found the delicate gold necklace resting against her collarbone. The vintage piece with its small emerald had been his grandmother's, given to her the night he proposed. She'd never taken it off, not even on her wedding day when she'd abandoned everything else. Some things, she realized, were harder to leave behind than others. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, Seattle's typical autumn weather matching Octavia's mood as she found Malcolm in his kitchen, already dressed for battle in a crisp white shirt and charcoal slacks. He'd made coffee, not the fancy espresso machine kind, but simple black coffee in a regular pot, the way she remembered he preferred. "We have 4 hours before the immigration interview," he said without looking up from his tablet. "We need to synchronize our stories, practice question responses, and review our timeline." Octavia accepted the coffee mug he offered, noting it matched the expensive china from the night before. Everything in Malcolm's life had become upgraded, refined, perfected. Everything except his ability to look at her without flinching. "I've prepared a comprehensive outline," he continued, handing her a folder thick with documents. "Our engagement period, the reasons for our separation, how we reconnected, why we decided to marry now. We need every detail consistent." She flipped through pages of typed notes, charts, timelines, their love story reduced to bullet points and logistics. "This reads like a business proposal." "Because that's what this is. Business." But his voice caught slightly on the word, and Octavia caught him staring at the way morning light caught the gold threads in her hair. Some things couldn't be reduced to bullet points, no matter how hard Malcolm tried. They spent the morning at his kitchen island, heads bent over documents, occasionally brushing fingers as they reached for the same papers. Each accidental touch sent sparks through Octavia's nervous system, and she noticed Malcolm's breathing change whenever she leaned close enough for him to catch her scent. "Question 15, Malcolm read from his list. "What attracted you to each other initially?" Octavia's cheeks warmed as memories flooded back. Their first meeting at a tech conference where she'd been presenting marketing strategies to startup founders. Malcolm had approached after her panel, dark eyes bright with curiosity rather than the typical male interest she'd grown tired of deflecting. "I was attracted to your intelligence," she said softly. "The way you asked questions that actually challenged my thinking instead of trying to impress me." Malcolm's pen stilled against the paper. "And I was attracted to your passion. The way you lit up talking about connecting people through storytelling. You made marketing sound like poetry." The admission hung between them, more intimate than any of the rehearsed answers they'd been practicing. For a moment, they weren't strangers pretending to be married. They were Malcolm and Octavia, remembering why they'd fallen in love in the first place. "We should stick to safer answers for the actual interview," Malcolm said, clearing his throat. But as they continued their preparation, Octavia noticed him relaxing incrementally. His shoulders lost some of their rigid tension, and occasionally she caught glimpses of the man she'd once known, brilliant, driven, but also capable of surprising gentleness. "Question 32, she read. "Describe your partner's morning routine." Malcolm smiled for the first time since she'd walked back into his life. "You hit snooze exactly 3 times, then lie in bed for another 5 minutes planning your outfit. You brush your teeth before coffee, which is objectively wrong, and you read news headlines while eating whatever healthy thing you've meal prepped for the week." Octavia stared at him in amazement. "You remember all that?" "I remember everything about you." The words slipped out before he could stop them, and his expression immediately shuttered closed again. "From when we were together, I mean, before." But the damage was done. The carefully maintained distance between them cracked, letting in dangerous hope. Octavia set down her coffee and moved around the island until she stood directly in front of him, close enough to see gold flecks in his dark eyes. "Malcolm, we need to talk about what happened. Really talk, not just create interview answers." His hands gripped the granite countertop until his knuckles went white. "There's nothing to discuss. You made your choice. I made a mistake. A terrible, cowardly mistake that I've regretted every day for 3 years." Something raw and painful flickered across his features. "Regret doesn't undo damage, Octavia." She wanted to reach for him, to bridge the space between them with touch, but the rigid set of his shoulders warned her away. Instead, she stayed where she was, letting her vulnerability show in her voice. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I shattered something that can never be fully repaired. But I need you to understand that leaving you wasn't about not loving you. It was about loving you too much to trap you in a life that would have brought you nothing but judgment and complications." Malcolm's laugh was bitter. "So you decided for both of us, just packed up your fears and disappeared without giving me the chance to fight for what we had?" Tears burned behind Octavia's eyes, but she blinked them back. "Your mother made it very clear that I would never be good enough for her son. Your friends kept asking when you were going to settle down with someone more suitable. Every charity gala, every business dinner, every family gathering. I was the outsider, the mistake, the phase you'd eventually outgrow. I didn't care what they thought, but I did. I cared so much it was eating me alive. I was 26 years old, Malcolm, and I was terrified of spending the rest of my life wondering if you'd wake up one day and realize you could have done better." Malcolm was quiet for a long moment, studying her face like he was seeing her clearly for the first time in years. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its sharp edge. "You were never a phase, Octavia. You were the best part of my life." The simple honesty of his words broke something open in her chest. Before she could stop herself, she reached out and covered his hand with hers. This time, he didn't pull away. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for hurting you." Malcolm's thumb traced across her knuckles, the same gentle touch he'd used to comfort her during their relationship. "I'm sorry, too, for not fighting harder, for letting you believe those people mattered more than what we had." They stood there in his pristine kitchen, hands linked across 3 years of hurt and silence, while Seattle's gray morning light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows. It wasn't forgiveness. They both carried too many scars for that to come easily. But it was something. A beginning, perhaps, or maybe just a moment of truce before the battle resumed. Malcolm's phone chimed with a calendar reminder, shattering their fragile connection. He glanced at the screen, and his expression shifted back to business mode. "We should leave for the immigration office soon. Are you ready to convince them we're madly in love?" Octavia's heart performed a complex rhythm against her ribs as she studied his face. 3 years ago, convincing people they were madly in love would have been effortless, because it was simply true. Now, pretending felt like walking through a minefield where every step might detonate something better left buried. But as they gathered their documents and prepared to sell their greatest lie, Octavia couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part wouldn't be fooling immigration services. It would be fooling themselves into believing their hearts hadn't already started hoping for something real again. Chapter 2. The innuendo in Diego's voice made Octavia's cheeks warm, but Malcolm's grip on her back tightened protectively. Not at all. Octavia was just getting ready for work. Malcolm's tone carried subtle warning, though Diego seemed oblivious to know it. "Actually, I was hoping to meet the woman who captured Malcolm's heart not once, but twice." Diego stepped into the apartment without invitation, his charm turned up to full wattage. "I have to say, the photos don't do you justice." "What photos?" Octavia asked, confused. Malcolm's expression darkened. "Diego. The engagement photos from 3 years ago. Malcolm kept one on his desk at the office until recently." Diego's smile held malicious amusement. "Right next to his computer, where everyone could see how heartbroken he was." Octavia felt like she'd been slapped. Malcolm had kept their photo displayed while she'd hidden every reminder of him in boxes she couldn't bear to throw away. The knowledge that he'd carried their love openly while she'd buried it made her chest tight with regret. "I should get dressed," she murmured, needing to escape the tension radiating from Malcolm. But as she moved toward the hallway, Diego caught her wrist gently. "Don't leave on my account. I was hoping to get to know my best friend's wife better." The possessive flash in Malcolm's eyes was unmistakable. His jaw tightened as he watched Diego's fingers circle Octavia's wrist, and something dangerous flickered across his features. "She's busy," Malcolm said curtly, moving to Diego's side in a way that forced him to release Octavia. "We have a schedule to keep." Diego raised his hands in mock surrender, but his grin suggested he'd gotten the reaction he wanted. "Easy, brother, I'm just being friendly." "Be friendly from a distance," Malcolm replied, his voice carrying an edge Octavia had never heard before. The exchange sent heat spiraling through her body. She'd seen Malcolm jealous before, but never with this controlled intensity that spoke of man who'd learned to channel emotion into power. The way he positioned himself between her and Diego, claiming her without words, made her pulse race with unwanted excitement. "I'll be right back," she said, retreating toward the guest room before the tension could escalate further. But she could hear their voices through the door as she changed, Diego needling Malcolm about his sudden marriage, and Malcolm's responses growing increasingly clipped. By the time she emerged in a professional dress and heels, the atmosphere in the living room felt explosive. "Ready," she announced, grabbing her purse and moving toward Malcolm. He stood immediately, one hand settling possessively on her waist as he guided her toward the door. The gesture was purely territorial, marking her as his in front of Diego, and despite knowing it was all for show, Octavia couldn't help the thrill that shot through her. "Dinner soon?" Diego called after them. "I'd love to hear how you two reconnected." "We'll be in touch," Malcolm replied without turning around. In the elevator, Octavia studied Malcolm's profile, noting the rigid set of his jaw and the way his fingers drummed against his thigh. That was intense. Diego likes to push boundaries. Always has. He's your business partner and oldest friend. Malcolm's eyes met hers in the elevator's mirrored walls. That doesn't give him the right to look at my wife like she's available. The word wife sent electricity through her nervous system, especially delivered in that possessive growl. But before she could respond, the elevator dinged their arrival at the parking garage. The ride to Octavia's office passed in charged silence, both of them processing Diego's unexpected visit and Malcolm's territorial response. When they reached her building, Malcolm walked her to the entrance like a real husband might, his hand never leaving her back. "I'll pick you up at 6, he said, leaning close enough that his breath warmed her ear. "We're having dinner with my mother tomorrow night. Genevieve wants to meet her daughter-in-law." Octavia's stomach dropped. "Malcolm, I don't think that's... Immigration expects us to integrate with family," We don't have a choice. His eyes softened slightly at her obvious panic. It'll be fine. She's evolved since you knew her before. But as Malcolm drove away, Octavia couldn't shake the memory of Genevieve Wimberly's thinly veiled disapproval from 3 years ago. The elegant woman who'd made it clear through 1,000 subtle cuts that Octavia would never be good enough for her son. Tomorrow night would test whether their fake marriage could survive the scrutiny of someone who'd been hoping for its failure all along. That evening, Octavia found herself in Malcolm's kitchen, stress-cooking dinner while he worked late preparing for his London trip. She'd fallen back into old patterns without thinking, using cooking as therapy, filling his sterile apartment with the scents of garlic and herbs like she was trying to make it feel like home. When Malcolm emerged from his office at 8 o'clock, drawn by the aromas drifting through his apartment, he stopped in the kitchen doorway and stared. Octavia had pulled her hair back in a messy bun, traded her work dress for yoga pants and one of his old t-shirts, and somehow transformed his showpiece kitchen into something warm and lived in. "You cooked," he said, wonder in his voice. "Thai curry. I found most of the ingredients in your pantry." She gestured toward the stove where coconut milk simmered with lemongrass and basil. "I hope that's okay." Malcolm moved closer, and she could see exhaustion in the lines around his eyes. "It smells incredible. I forgot how much I missed having real food in this place." "You forgot how much you missed having someone cook for you, you mean?" The words came out with more intimacy than she'd intended, echoing domesticity from their shared past. "Maybe I did." His voice was soft, vulnerable in a way that made her chest tight with longing. They ate at his kitchen island instead of the formal dining room, sharing wine and conversation that flowed easier than it had since her return. Malcolm told her about the London acquisition, the challenges of expanding into new markets, the pressure of managing 300 employees' livelihoods. Octavia described her current freelance marketing projects, the corporate clients who treated creativity like a commodity, her dreams of starting her own agency someday. "You should do it," Malcolm said when she mentioned her business plans. "You have the talent and experience. It takes capital I don't have, especially now with my father's medical bills." Malcolm set down his wineglass, studying her face in the warm kitchen light. "What if you had an investor, someone who believed in your vision?" Octavia's pulse quickened at the suggestion behind his words. "Malcolm, I can't accept, not charity, investment. Your marketing strategies were always brilliant, Octavia. You could revolutionize how companies connect with their audiences." The belief in his voice was more seductive than any physical touch. This was the Malcolm who'd encouraged her ambitions, who'd seen potential in her ideas when she'd barely believed in them herself. Having him look at her like she was capable of anything made her feel powerful and desired in ways that had nothing to do with their physical attraction. "We'll see," she said softly, not trusting herself to say more. As they cleaned up together, moving around each other in the kitchen with unconscious choreography, Octavia felt the dangerous pull of domesticity. This was what their life could have been. Shared meals, easy conversation, the simple pleasure of taking care of each other at the end of long days. When Malcolm reached around her to put dishes in the dishwasher, his chest pressed against her back for just a moment. The contact sent heat racing through her body, and she felt him pause, his breath catching as he registered their position. "Octavia," he murmured, his voice rough with want. She turned in his arms, suddenly breathless as she found herself trapped between Malcolm's body and the kitchen counter. His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs stroking across her cheekbones as his dark eyes searched hers. "We can't keep doing this," she whispered, even as her body swayed toward him. Doing what? But his lips were already hovering near hers, and they both knew exactly what dangerous territory they were entering. "Pretending this is just business when we both know," Malcolm's mouth covered hers, cutting off her words with a kiss that held 3 years of hunger and regret. "Yeah," Octavia melted against him, her hands fisting in his shirt as she kissed him back with equal desperation. He tasted like wine and possibility, like coming home after being lost in the wilderness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Malcolm rested his forehead against hers. "I know," he said quietly. "I know this is more than business. I know we're playing with fire, and I know we're both going to get burned." "Then why?" "Because I'd rather burn with you than freeze without you." The raw honesty in his voice broke something open in Octavia's chest. She could see her own longing reflected in his eyes, the same desperate hope that maybe they could find their way back to each other despite everything that had gone wrong. But before either of them could take the next step into dangerous territory, Malcolm's phone rang with another urgent London call. The spell broke as reality intruded, reminding them both that they were walking a tightrope between pretense and truth, with no safety net below. "I should take this," Malcolm said reluctantly, stepping back. Octavia nodded, wrapping her arms around herself as the warmth of his touch faded. "I should get some sleep anyway. Big day tomorrow." As she headed toward the guest room, she could hear Malcolm answering his phone with crisp professionalism, switching back into CEO mode with practiced ease. But when she glanced back from the hallway, she caught him watching her retreat with naked longing that made her knees weak. 12 months suddenly felt like both an eternity and nowhere near long enough to figure out what was happening between them. They were supposed to be pretending to be married, but somewhere in the space between performance and reality, the lines had started to blur in ways that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Tomorrow night would bring Genevieve Wimberly and a test of their united front. But tonight, Octavia fell asleep with the taste of Malcolm's kiss on her lips and the dangerous hope that maybe some things were worth the risk of getting burned. Federal Building's sterile corridors smelled of industrial disinfectant and nervous sweat as Malcolm and Octavia made their way to immigration services. Other couples sat on hard plastic chairs, some holding hands, others staring at forms with the glazed expressions of people navigating bureaucratic purgatory. Octavia's heels clicked against linoleum floors as they approached the reception desk. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a sophisticated navy dress that suggested success without ostentation, paired with the pearl earrings Malcolm had given her for their 6-month anniversary. She'd kept them too, along with the necklace, treasures from a life she'd convinced herself to abandon. "Mr. and Mrs. Wimberly," the receptionist announced when their names were called. The words still felt foreign, like wearing someone else's clothes. But Malcolm's hand found the small of her back as they walked toward the interview room, and the familiar touch sent warmth radiating through her body. He'd always guided her that way, protective, possessive in the most tender sense, like she was something precious he wanted to keep safe. Immigration Officer Esteban Costello looked like a man who'd heard every lie in the book and believed none of them. His dark eyes swept over them with professional skepticism as they settled into chairs across from his metal desk. Behind him, diplomas and commendations covered the wall like armor against deception. "Mr. Wimberly, Miss Brock," he began, consulting their thick file. "I understand you have an unusual timeline for your relationship." Malcolm's posture straightened with familiar authority. 3 years of running a tech empire had honed his confidence into something sharper, more commanding. "Our relationship has been complicated, Officer Costello, but our commitment to each other has never wavered. According to my records, you were engaged 3 years ago. The wedding was canceled the day of the ceremony." Costello's tone remained neutral, but his eyes watched their reactions carefully. "Can you explain the circumstances?" Octavia's throat tightened, but she forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. "I got scared. Malcolm's world was very different from mine, and I wasn't sure I belonged in it. Instead of talking through my fears, I ran." "And why return now? Why marriage instead of simply dating again?" Malcolm's hand found hers across the small table, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that felt both natural and electric. "Because we've both grown. We understand now that love isn't about fitting into each other's worlds. It's about building a new world together." The words were part of their rehearsed script, but the way Malcolm looked at her while saying them felt dangerously real. His thumb traced circles on her palm, and Octavia had to concentrate on breathing normally. "Miss Brock, what changed your mind about Mr. Wimberly's world, as you put it?" "I realized I was letting other people's opinions matter more than my own happiness," she answered honestly. "Malcolm never made me feel like I didn't belong. I did that to myself." Costello made notes in their file, his expression unreadable. "Tell me about your daily routines. How do you navigate living together after 3 years apart?" They fell into easy rhythm, describing morning coffee together, shared meals, the way Malcolm read business journals while Octavia watched cooking shows. The details were fabricated, but they built them from memories of how they used to be, and somehow that made the lies feel like echoes of truth. "What do you argue about?" Costello asked suddenly. Malcolm and Octavia exchanged a look, and for a moment they were completely in sync. "She leaves wet towels on the bathroom floor," Malcolm said. "He reorganizes my bookshelves without asking," Octavia added, "and she reads 3 books at once, leaving them open everywhere. While he listens to the same playlist on repeat until I want to hide his headphones." Their banter came naturally, sparked by real irritations from their past relationship. Costello's expression softened slightly, the first crack in his professional skepticism. "How do you handle conflict resolution?" "We talk," Octavia said simply. "Eventually. Sometimes we need space first, but we always come back to each other." "Miss Brock tends to need more processing time," Malcolm added. "I've learned to give her space instead of pushing for immediate resolution. And Malcolm used to shut down when he felt overwhelmed. Now he tells me when he needs quiet time instead of just disappearing into his work." They were describing growth that had never actually happened between them, improvements to patterns that had contributed to their original breakup. But as they spoke, Octavia could see the relationship they might have had if they'd been brave enough to fight for it. Costello spent another 20 minutes probing their story, asking about families, shared friends, future plans. They navigated each question carefully, building their fictional reconciliation on foundations of real history. By the time he dismissed them with a promise to contact them within 48 hours, Octavia felt emotionally drained. "That went well," Malcolm said as they walked back to his car. "Did it? I felt like he could see right through us." Malcolm held the passenger door open for her, another gesture that transported her backward through time. "We know each other, Octavia. That came through, even if the timeline is adjusted." The drive back to his penthouse passed in comfortable silence, both of them processing what had just happened. They'd spent 2 hours pretending to be in love, and somewhere in the middle of their performance, the line between pretense and reality had started to blur. Back in Malcolm's apartment, the tension that had been building all morning finally found an outlet. They'd barely closed the door when Octavia spun to face him, adrenaline and emotion making her bold. "That was incredible. We actually pulled it off." "We did." Malcolm's eyes were bright with shared victory, and for a moment, he looked like the man she'd fallen in love with, brilliant, passionate, alive with possibility. Before either of them could think better of it, Octavia threw her arms around his neck in celebration. Malcolm caught her instinctively, lifting her slightly off the ground as he spun them both around, their bodies pressed together, familiar and foreign at once, and when he set her down, they didn't step apart. "Octavia," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. She could feel his heart beating against her chest, could see her own desire reflected in his dark eyes. The space between them crackled with electricity, 3 years of separation and longing compressed into this single moment of triumph and possibility. Then Malcolm's expression shuddered, and he stepped back, putting careful distance between them. "We should celebrate our successful performance," he said formally. "Perhaps dinner?" The word performance hit Octavia like cold water, reminding her that everything they'd shared in that interview room had been scripted, rehearsed, fake. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling exposed. "I should call my sister, let her know how it went," Malcolm nodded, his professional mask sliding back into place. "Of course, I have some work to catch up on anyway." But as they retreated to separate corners of his apartment, both carrying the echo of those few seconds when they'd held each other like they meant it, Octavia wondered how they were going to survive 12 months of this exquisite torture. 3 days later, Attorney Varney called with news that should have felt like pure victory. Their marriage had been approved by immigration services. Malcolm's visa would be renewed, his business trip to London was back on schedule, and their performance had been convincing enough to fool federal investigators. "Congratulations," Varney said over speakerphone. "You're legally married for immigration purposes. Just remember to maintain the appearance of a genuine relationship. Officer Costello mentioned he might conduct follow-up interviews periodically." After hanging up, Malcolm and Octavia sat in his living room, the weight of their success settling around them like fog. They'd gotten what they wanted, but somehow victory felt hollow. "So that's it," Octavia said. "We're married." For 12 months, Malcolm reminded her, then divorce and separate lives. The reminder stung more than it should have. Octavia nodded, wrapping her arms around her knees as she curled into the corner of his expensive sofa. When do you leave for London? Next week. I'll be gone for 10 days, possibly 2 weeks. The thought of him leaving so soon after they'd started finding their rhythm together made Octavia's chest tight with unexpected panic. Will immigration expect me to go with you? No, it's a business trip. Spouses don't always travel together. Malcolm's voice was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. You'll have the apartment to yourself. But Octavia caught the flicker of something in his expression. Disappointment, maybe, or longing. The same emotion that had been building between them like pressure in a sealed container, dangerous and impossible to ignore. That evening, Malcolm worked late in his home office while Octavia attempted to read in the living room. But concentration proved impossible when every few minutes she could hear him on conference calls, his voice carrying that note of absolute authority she'd always found irresistible. He was commanding million-dollar decisions with the same confidence he'd once used to order coffee, and the familiar sound made her body warm with remembered attraction. Around midnight, she gave up pretending to read and padded toward the kitchen for water. Malcolm's office door stood slightly ajar, golden light spilling into the dark hallway. She couldn't resist pausing to look inside. He'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, dark hair falling across his forehead as he studied financial projections on multiple monitors. The sight transported her back to countless nights when she'd find him working late, bringing him tea and convincing him to come to bed. Sometimes she'd massage the tension from his shoulders while he finished emails. Other times she'd simply climb into his lap and distract him with kisses until work became the last thing on his mind. As if sensing her presence, Malcolm looked up. Their eyes met across the space between them, and the air grew thick with unspoken want. His gaze traveled over her silk pajama set, modest enough for a fake wife, but still revealing the curves he'd once traced with reverent fingers. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. "Too much caffeine." The lie came easily, though they both knew the real reason she was prowling his apartment at midnight had nothing to do with coffee. Malcolm pushed back from his desk and stood, moving toward her with predatory grace. "I was about to take a break anyway." He stopped just close enough for her to catch his scent, expensive cologne mixed with something uniquely Malcolm that no amount of success could change. Her pulse quickened as memories flooded back. Late nights when he'd find her reading and coax her into bed with nothing but heated looks and gentle touches. "How's the London preparation going?" she asked, desperate to fill the silence before it became too loaded with possibility. "Complex. We're acquiring 3 companies simultaneously." His eyes never left her face as he spoke. "It requires delicate handling." The way he said delicate handling made heat pool low in Octavia's belly. Everything about Malcolm had become more intense over the past 3 years. His confidence, his presence, his ability to make her feel like the only woman in the world with nothing but a look. "You always were good at managing complex situations," she murmured. "Was I?" His hand came up to trace the edge of her necklace, his grandmother's necklace, where it rested against her collarbone. "I seem to remember failing pretty spectacularly at managing the most important situation of my life." The touch of his fingertips against her skin sent fire racing through her veins. Octavia's breathing quickened as Malcolm's thumb brushed along the delicate gold chain, his touch achingly gentle yet possessive. "Malcolm," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if it was a warning or a plea. His eyes darkened as he studied her face, seeing the desire she couldn't hide. "You still wear it. Every day." "I couldn't take it off." The admission slipped out before she could stop it, raw honesty in the dim hallway. "It was the only piece of you I had left." Malcolm's control visibly cracked. His other hand came up to cup her face, thumb stroking across her cheekbone with devastating tenderness. "Octavia." She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed as 3 years of longing compressed into this single moment of connection. When she opened them again, Malcolm was staring at her like she was something miraculous he'd thought lost forever. The space between them disappeared as he lowered his head, his lips hovering just above hers. Time suspended, breath mingling, hearts racing in perfect synchronization. All it would take was the smallest movement forward, and they'd be lost in each other again. Then his phone buzzed with an urgent ringtone from his office, breaking the spell like shattered glass. Malcolm jerked back, the moment evaporating as reality crashed over them. His hand dropped from her face, leaving her skin cold and aching for his touch. "I should take that," he said roughly, not meeting her eyes. "London office." "Of course." Octavia wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling exposed in her silk pajamas. "I should let you work." But as she hurried back toward the guest room, she could feel Malcolm watching her retreat. And when she reached her door and glanced back, the hunger in his eyes made her knees weak with possibility and regret. That night, Octavia lay awake listening to Malcolm's voice through the walls, discussing business with London partners while she burned with unfulfilled longing just rooms away. They were playing a dangerous game, pretending to be married while fighting an attraction that had never really died. The next morning brought a new challenge in the form of Diego Lucero appearing at Malcolm's door with coffee and business documents. Octavia answered his knock, still wearing her silk pajamas and Malcolm's old Columbia University sweatshirt she'd found in his closet. Diego's dark eyes swept over her appreciatively, taking in her sleep-mussed hair and the way Malcolm's sweatshirt fell to mid-thigh on her smaller frame. Well, well, the mysterious wife. "Diego." Malcolm appeared behind her, fully dressed for business but moving with subtle possessiveness as he placed his hand on Octavia's lower back. "You're early." Traffic was light. Diego's gaze shifted between them, clearly assessing the dynamics. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." The innuendo in Diego's voice made Octavia's cheeks warm, but Malcolm's grip on her back tightened protectively. "Not at all. Octavia was just getting ready for work." Malcolm's tone carried subtle warning, though Diego seemed oblivious to it. "Actually, I was hoping to meet the woman who captured Malcolm's heart not once, but twice." Diego stepped into the apartment without invitation, his charm turned up to full wattage. "I have to say, the photos don't do you justice." "What photos?" Octavia asked, confused. Malcolm's expression darkened. "Diego. The engagement photos from 3 years ago. Malcolm kept one on his desk at the office until recently." Diego's smile held malicious amusement, right next to his computer, where everyone could see how heartbroken he was. Octavia felt like she'd been slapped. Malcolm had kept their photo displayed while she'd hidden every reminder of him in boxes she couldn't bear to throw away. The knowledge that he'd carried their love openly while she'd buried it made her chest tight with regret. "I should get dressed," she murmured, needing to escape the tension radiating from Malcolm. But as she moved toward the hallway, Diego caught her wrist gently. "Don't leave on my account. I was hoping to get to know my best friend's wife better." The possessive flash in Malcolm's eyes was unmistakable. His jaw tightened as he watched Diego's fingers circle Octavia's wrist, and something dangerous flickered across his features. "She's busy," Malcolm said curtly, moving to Diego's side in a way that forced him to release Octavia. "We have a schedule to keep." Diego raised his hands in mock surrender, but his grin suggested he'd gotten the reaction he wanted. "Easy, brother. I'm just being friendly." "Be friendly from a distance," Malcolm replied, his voice carrying an edge Octavia had never heard before. The exchange sent heat spiraling through her body. She'd seen Malcolm jealous before, but never with this controlled intensity that spoke of a man who'd learned to channel emotion into power. The way he positioned himself between her and Diego, claiming her without words, made her pulse race with unwanted excitement. "I'll be right back," she said, retreating toward the guest room before the tension could escalate further. But she could hear their voices through the door as she changed, Diego needling Malcolm about his sudden marriage, and Malcolm's responses growing increasingly clipped. By the time she emerged in a professional dress and heels, the atmosphere in the living room felt explosive. "Ready," she announced, grabbing her purse and moving toward Malcolm. He stood immediately, one hand settling possessively on her waist as he guided her toward the door. The gesture was purely territorial, marking her as his in front of Diego, and despite knowing it was all for show, Octavia couldn't help the thrill that shot through her. "Dinner soon?" Diego called after them. "I'd love to hear how you two reconnected." "We'll be in touch," Malcolm replied without turning around. In the elevator, Octavia studied Malcolm's profile, noting the rigid set of his jaw and the way his fingers drummed against his thigh. That was intense. Diego likes to push boundaries, always has. He's your business partner and oldest friend. Malcolm's eyes met hers in the elevator's mirrored walls. That doesn't give him the right to look at my wife like she's available. The word wife sent electricity through her nervous system, especially delivered in that possessive growl. But before she could respond, the elevator dinged their arrival at the parking garage. The ride to Octavia's office passed in charged silence, both of them processing Diego's unexpected visit and Malcolm's territorial response. When they reached her building, Malcolm walked her to the entrance like a real husband might, his hand never leaving her back. "I'll pick you up at 6, he said, leaning close enough that his breath warmed her ear. "We're having dinner with my mother tomorrow night. Genevieve wants to meet her daughter-in-law." Octavia's stomach dropped. "Malcolm, I don't think that's... Immigration expects us to integrate with family. We don't have a choice." His eyes softened slightly at her obvious panic. "It'll be fine. She's evolved since you knew her before." But as Malcolm drove away, Octavia couldn't shake the memory of Genevieve Wimberly's thinly veiled disapproval from 3 years ago. The elegant woman who'd made it clear through 1,000 subtle cuts that Octavia would never be good enough for her son. Tomorrow night would test whether their fake marriage could survive the scrutiny of someone who'd been hoping for its failure all along. That evening, Octavia found herself in Malcolm's kitchen, stress-cooking dinner while he worked late preparing for his London trip. She'd fallen back into old patterns without thinking, using cooking as therapy, filling his sterile apartment with the scents of garlic and herbs like she was trying to make it feel like home. When Malcolm emerged from his office at 8 o'clock, drawn by the aromas drifting through his apartment, he stopped in the kitchen doorway and stared. Octavia had pulled her hair back in a messy bun, traded her work dress for yoga pants and one of his old t-shirts, and somehow transformed his showpiece kitchen into something warm and lived in. "You cooked," he said, wonder in his voice. "Thai curry? I found most of the ingredients in your pantry." She gestured toward the stove where coconut milk simmered with lemongrass and basil. "I hope that's okay." Malcolm moved closer and she could see exhaustion in the lines around his eyes. "It smells incredible. I forgot how much I missed having real food in this place." "You forgot how much you missed having someone cook for you, you mean?" The words came out with more intimacy than she'd intended, echoing domesticity from their shared past. "Maybe I did." His voice was soft, vulnerable in a way that made her chest tight with longing. They ate at his kitchen island instead of the formal dining room, sharing wine and conversation that flowed easier than it had since her return. Malcolm told her about the London acquisition, the challenges of expanding into new markets, the pressure of managing 300 employees' livelihoods. Octavia described her current freelance marketing projects, the corporate clients who treated creativity like a commodity, her dreams of starting her own agency someday. "You should do it," Malcolm said when she mentioned her business plans. "You have the talent and experience. It takes capital I don't have, especially now with my father's medical bills." Malcolm set down his wine glass, studying her face in the warm kitchen light. "What if you had an investor, someone who believed in your vision?" Octavia's pulse quickened at the suggestion behind his words. "Malcolm, I can't accept..." "Not charity, investment. Your marketing strategies were always brilliant, Octavia. You could revolutionize how companies connect with their audiences." The belief in his voice was more seductive than any physical touch. This was the Malcolm who'd encouraged her ambitions, who'd seen potential in her ideas when she'd barely believed in them herself. Having him look at her like she was capable of anything made her feel powerful and desired in ways that had nothing to do with their physical attraction. "We'll see," she said softly, not trusting herself to say more. As they cleaned up together, moving around each other in the kitchen with unconscious choreography, Octavia felt the dangerous pull of domesticity. This was what their life could have been: shared meals, easy conversation, the simple pleasure of taking care of each other at the end of long days. When Malcolm reached around her to put dishes in the dishwasher, his chest pressed against her back for just a moment. The contact sent heat racing through her body, and she felt him pause, his breath catching as he registered their position. "Octavia," he murmured, his voice rough with want. She turned in his arms, suddenly breathless as she found herself trapped between Malcolm's body and the kitchen counter. His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs stroking across her cheekbones as his dark eyes searched hers. "We can't keep doing this," she whispered, even as her body swayed toward him. "Doing what?" But his lips were already hovering near hers, and they both knew exactly what dangerous territory they were entering. "Pretending this is just business when we both know," Malcolm's mouth covered hers, cutting off her words with a kiss that held 3 years of hunger and regret. Octavia melted against him, her hands fisting in his shirt as she kissed him back with equal desperation. He tasted like wine and possibility, like coming home after being lost in the wilderness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Malcolm rested his forehead against hers. "I know," he said quietly. "I know this is more than business. I know we're playing with fire. And I know we're both going to get burned." "Then why?" "Because I'd rather burn with you than freeze without you." The raw honesty in his voice broke something open in Octavia's chest. She could see her own longing reflected in his eyes, the same desperate hope that maybe they could find their way back to each other, despite everything that had gone wrong. But before either of them could take the next step into dangerous territory, Malcolm's phone rang with another urgent London call. The spell broke as reality intruded, reminding them both that they were walking a tightrope between pretense and truth with no safety net below. "I should take this," Malcolm said reluctantly, stepping back. Octavia nodded, wrapping her arms around herself as the warmth of his touch faded. "I should get some sleep anyway. Big day tomorrow." As she headed toward the guest room, she could hear Malcolm answering his phone with crisp professionalism, switching back into CEO mode with practiced ease. But when she glanced back from the hallway, she caught him watching her retreat with naked longing that made her knees weak. 12 months suddenly felt like both an eternity and nowhere near long enough to figure out what was happening between them. They were supposed to be pretending to be married, but somewhere in the space between performance and reality, the lines had started to blur in ways that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Tomorrow night would bring Genevieve Wimberly and a test of their united front. But tonight, Octavia fell asleep with the taste of Malcolm's kiss on her lips and the dangerous hope that maybe some things were worth the risk of getting burned. Chapter 3. The next evening arrived with Seattle's typical autumn chill, rain drumming against the windows of Malcolm's penthouse as Octavia prepared to face his mother. She'd changed outfits 3 times, settling finally on a sophisticated black dress that struck the balance between respectful and confident. The vintage necklace rested against her throat like armor, a reminder that she belonged wherever Malcolm wanted her to be. Malcolm emerged from his bedroom in a charcoal suit that emphasized his lean frame, and for a moment they simply looked at each other across his living room. 3 years had changed them both, but standing there dressed for battle, they looked like the power couple they'd once dreamed of becoming. "You look beautiful," he said softly, moving to straighten an invisible flaw in his tie. "You clean up well yourself." Octavia's attempt at lightness couldn't quite mask her nervousness. "Any last-minute advice for surviving dinner with your mother?" Malcolm's expression grew serious as he approached her, his hands settling on her shoulders in a gesture that was both comforting and possessive. "Genevieve can be challenging, but remember, you're my wife now. That gives you power she has to acknowledge, whether she likes it or not." The way he said "my wife" sent familiar warmth spiraling through Octavia's body. In his voice, the title sounded like a promise rather than a performance. "And if she asks about our reconciliation?" "We tell the truth. We realized we were both too proud and scared to fight for what we had. Now we're older, wiser, and ready to build something stronger." His thumbs traced small circles on her shoulders as he spoke, and Octavia found herself leaning into his touch despite her better judgment. The past few days had been a masterclass in controlled torture, living in intimate proximity while maintaining careful distance, sharing moments of connection that felt dangerously real. "Malcolm," she began, but he silenced her with a finger against her lips. "Whatever happens tonight, we present a united front. Genevieve needs to see that this marriage isn't something she can undermine or dismiss." The protective determination in his voice made Octavia's chest tight with something that felt suspiciously like love. This was the Malcolm who'd once defended her against condescending colleagues and social climbers who'd made it clear that anyone who disrespected her would answer to him. 20 minutes later, they stood outside the exclusive restaurant where Genevieve Wimberly held court among Seattle's social elite. Through the windows, Octavia could see her seated at a corner table, silver hair styled in an elegant chignon, posture perfect as she surveyed the dining room like a queen holding audience. "Ready?" Malcolm asked, offering his arm. Octavia squared her shoulders and took his elbow, drawing strength from his solid presence beside her. "Let's go charm your mother." Genevieve rose as they approached, her pale blue eyes taking inventory of Octavia from head to toe with the precision of an appraiser evaluating merchandise. 3 years hadn't softened her patrician features or diminished her ability to make others feel judged with a single glance. "Malcolm, darling," she accepted his kiss on both cheeks with practiced elegance before turning to Octavia. "And Octavia, how unexpected to see you again." "Hello, Genevieve. Thank you for dinner." Octavia's voice remained steady despite the familiar twist of inadequacy in her stomach. They settled into their seats, Malcolm positioning himself between the women like a buffer against potential conflict. The restaurant's ambiance was appropriately refined. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, the kind of place where conversations were conducted in civilized tones, regardless of how savage the actual content might be. "I must say, I was quite surprised by your marriage announcement," Genevieve began once they'd ordered wine. "So sudden, after all this time." "Some things are worth waiting for," Malcolm replied smoothly, his hand finding Octavia's on the white linen tablecloth. "We needed time to grow into the people we were meant to become." Genevieve's smile could have cut glass. "How philosophical. And Octavia, what convinced you to give my son another chance, after your rather dramatic exit from his life?" The question was designed to wound, to remind Octavia of her worst moment and make her defensive. But 3 years of building her own career had given her confidence that 26-year-old Octavia had lacked. "I realized I was letting fear make my decisions instead of love," she answered calmly. Malcolm deserved better than someone who ran away when things got complicated. "And now you're ready for the complications that come with being a Wimberly?" The way Genevieve said the family name made it sound like joining an exclusive club Octavia had no business aspiring to. But before the familiar shame could take hold, Malcolm's thumb stroked across her knuckles in subtle support. "Octavia has built an impressive marketing career," he said firmly. "She's perfectly capable of handling whatever complications arise." "Oh yes, your little freelance projects." Genevieve's tone suggested marketing was slightly more respectable than professional gambling. "Though I suppose with Malcolm's resources, you won't need to worry about working much longer." The implication that Octavia was a gold digger hung in the air like expensive perfume, cloying and impossible to ignore. Heat flashed through her chest, but she kept her voice level. "Actually, I plan to expand my business. Malcolm's been encouraging me to start my own agency." "How modern. Though I imagine with children on the horizon, you'll want to focus on more traditional priorities." Children. The word hit Octavia like a physical blow, bringing with it a flood of memories from their original relationship. They'd talked about having kids, about the family they'd build together, the babies who would inherit Malcolm's intelligence and her creativity, who would navigate the world with the confidence that came from being unconditionally loved. "We're in no rush," Malcolm said, his voice carrying a warning edge that made Genevieve blink in surprise. But she recovered quickly, launching into a detailed account of the charity boards she thought Octavia should join, the social obligations that came with being Malcolm's wife, the proper way to navigate Seattle's high society. Each suggestion felt like another chain being wrapped around Octavia's neck, binding her to a life of performing respectability for people who would never fully accept her. "The Worthington Gala next month will be your first major test," Genevieve concluded. "Everyone will be watching to see how you handle yourself." "I'm sure Octavia will be fine," Malcolm said tightly. "She's always excelled in professional settings." "This isn't a professional setting, darling. This is society. The rules are quite different." The subtle dig made Malcolm's jaw tighten with barely controlled anger. Octavia could see him struggling between protective instincts and the desire to maintain peace with his mother. 3 years ago, he would have stayed silent, hoping to avoid confrontation, but the man beside her had learned to fight for what mattered. "The rules are that Octavia is my wife and deserves your respect," he said quietly, his voice carrying unmistakable authority. "Any other rules are irrelevant." Genevieve's eyebrows rose at her son's unprecedented directness, but before she could respond, their entrees arrived. The remainder of dinner passed in stilted conversation about Malcolm's business expansion and neutral topics that couldn't be weaponized into social commentary. But as they prepared to leave, Genevieve delivered her final salvo with surgical precision. "Walk me to my car, Malcolm. I'd like a private word." Octavia's stomach clenched, knowing she was about to be discussed like a problem to be solved, but Malcolm's hand tightened on hers in reassurance. "Anything you need to say to me, you can say in front of my wife." The words hit Genevieve like a slap, her composure cracking just enough to reveal surprise and something that might have been grudging respect. She recovered quickly, but the moment of vulnerability had been noted. "Very well. I simply wanted to ensure you've thought this through carefully. Marriage is a serious commitment, especially given your history." "Our history is exactly why I'm certain," Malcolm replied. "I loved Octavia enough to let her go 3 years ago. Now I love her enough to fight for her." Octavia's breath caught at the raw honesty in his voice. He was still performing for his mother's benefit, but the emotion behind his words felt dangerously real. "I see." Genevieve studied them both with calculating eyes. "Well then, I suppose welcome to the family, Octavia. I do hope you'll prove more permanent this time." The backhanded welcome was probably the best Octavia could hope for, and she accepted it with gracious dignity. "Thank you, Genevieve. I look forward to many more dinners together." As they watched Malcolm's mother drive away in her silver Mercedes, Octavia finally allowed her shoulders to relax. "That went better than expected." "Did it? She was horrible to you. But you defended me. 3 years ago you would have stayed quiet and tried to smooth things over later." Octavia turned to face him in the restaurant's parking lot, Seattle city lights reflecting in his dark eyes. "You chose me over keeping peace with her." Malcolm cupped her face with both hands, his touch gentle despite the intensity in his expression. "I chose you over everything, Octavia. That's what I should have done 3 years ago." The words hung between them like a confession, loaded with possibility and regret. Octavia's heart raced as she realized they'd crossed another line in their elaborate performance. This wasn't fake anymore. It was raw honesty that could destroy them both. "Malcolm," he kissed her before she could finish the thought, claiming her mouth with desperate hunger in the middle of the parking lot. Octavia melted against him, her hands fisting in his suit jacket as she kissed him back with 3 years of suppressed longing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Malcolm rested his forehead against hers. "I can't pretend anymore," he said roughly. "I can't live with you and touch you and defend you and pretend it doesn't mean everything to me." Octavia's chest tightened with hope and terror in equal measure. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want this to be real. I want us to be real." His thumbs stroked across her cheekbones as he spoke. "I know we have a lot to work through, and I know it's complicated, but I can't fake being married to you for 12 months when all I want is to actually be your husband." The confession broke something open in Octavia's heart that she'd been trying to keep locked away. Standing in the parking lot with Malcolm's hands on her face and his heart in his eyes, she finally admitted the truth she'd been running from since the moment she'd walked back into his life. "I want that too," she whispered. "I've wanted that since the night I left, but I was too scared to believe we could make it work." Malcolm's smile was like sunrise after the longest night of her life. "We're both scared, but we're not the same people we were 3 years ago. We're stronger now." "Are we strong enough for this? For all the complications and judgment?" And he silenced her with another kiss, softer this time, but no less devastating. "We're strong enough for anything if we face it together." As they drove back to his penthouse in charged silence, both processing what had just shifted between them, Octavia felt like she was free-falling without a parachute. They'd started this arrangement as business partners with a shared past. Now they were something else entirely. Two people who'd found their way back to love despite every reason it should have been impossible. The stakes just keep rising for Malcolm and Octavia. What do you think? Can love really conquer family disapproval and outside threats? Let me know your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for the conclusion of their story. But their newfound honesty was about to face its first major test. As Malcolm unlocked his apartment door, his phone buzzed with a text that made his expression darken immediately. "What is it?" Octavia asked, noting his sudden tension. "Esteban Costello wants to schedule a follow-up interview tomorrow morning." Malcolm's voice was grim as he read the message. "Someone contacted immigration services with concerns about our marriage." Octavia's stomach dropped. "Who would do that?" Malcolm's expression was answer enough. Only one person knew enough about their real history and had motive to destroy their arrangement: his oldest friend and business partner, who'd been watching their reconciliation with increasing resentment. "Diego," she breathed. Malcolm nodded, his face hard with betrayal and anger. "He's been asking too many questions, pushing boundaries. I think he's decided our marriage is a threat to our business partnership." The irony was cruel. Just as they decided to make their fake marriage real, someone was trying to prove it had been fake all along. But as Octavia watched Malcolm's expression shift into the controlled fury of a man who'd learned to turn emotion into weapon, she realized their greatest challenge wouldn't be convincing immigration services of their love. It would be surviving the betrayal of someone Malcolm had trusted like a brother, who was now willing to destroy them both to protect his own interests. The next morning brought Esteban Costello to Malcolm's penthouse at 8 a.m. sharp, his expression even more skeptical than during their first interview. This time, he wasn't alone. A female colleague accompanied him, along with a recording device that turned their living room into an interrogation chamber. "Mr. and Mrs. Wimberly," Costello began formally, "we've received information suggesting your marriage may not be genuine. We need to conduct a more thorough evaluation." Malcolm's hand found Octavia's on the sofa, their fingers intertwining with practiced ease that had become second nature over the past weeks. But she could feel tension radiating from his body like heat from a furnace. "What kind of information?" Malcolm asked, his voice steady but dangerous. "Anonymous tip from someone claiming intimate knowledge of your relationship history. They suggest this marriage is purely for immigration benefits." Octavia's chest tightened with familiar anxiety, but she forced herself to meet Costello's gaze directly. "What do you need from us to resolve this?" "Complete transparency. We'll be interviewing your friends, family members, business associates. We'll examine your financial records, living arrangements, social media presence. Any inconsistencies will be grounds for immediate dissolution of your immigration status, Mr. Wimberly." The threat hung in the air like a sword over their heads. Malcolm's thumb traced calming circles on Octavia's palm, but his expression had shifted into the cold calculation she recognized from his most challenging business negotiations. "Interview whoever you need," he said quietly. "Our marriage will stand up to any scrutiny." But as Costello and his colleagues spread documents across Malcolm's coffee table, preparing to dissect their relationship with surgical precision, Octavia couldn't shake the feeling that Diego's betrayal was just the beginning. Someone was actively working to destroy not just their immigration arrangement, but the real love they'd finally admitted to each other. The question was whether their newfound honesty would be strong enough to survive a federal investigation designed to expose every lie they'd ever told, including the biggest lie of all, which was pretending they didn't belong together. Hours later, after Costello had cataloged every inconsistency in their living arrangement and scheduled interviews with everyone they'd ever mentioned, Octavia sat in Malcolm's kitchen, wondering if they'd just lost everything they'd fought to rebuild. "We need to talk to Diego," she said finally. Malcolm's expression was granite hard. "I need to talk to Diego. This is between him and me." "This affects both of us, Malcolm. If he's really trying to sabotage our marriage, he is." Malcolm's voice carried absolute certainty. "The question is why he's willing to destroy 15 years of friendship to do it." But as they prepared to confront the betrayal that threatened everything they'd built together, neither of them could imagine how much deeper Diego's treachery actually ran, or how far he was willing to go to tear apart the love he'd decided was too dangerous to allow. The game had changed from pretending to be married to proving their marriage was worth fighting for. And with federal investigators watching their every move, they were about to discover whether love really could survive when everything else fell apart. Chapter 4. That afternoon, Malcolm confronted Diego in the Nexus Technologies conference room, 30 floors above. Seattle's bustling streets. Through the glass walls, Octavia could see both men's body language growing increasingly tense as their conversation escalated from professional disagreement to personal betrayal. She couldn't hear the words, but Malcolm's controlled fury was evident in every rigid line of his posture. Diego gestured emphatically, his usual charm replaced by defensive aggression that confirmed her worst suspicions. When Malcolm finally emerged from the conference room, his expression was carved from stone. "It was him," he said without preamble. "Diego contacted immigration services." Octavia's heart sank, despite expecting this confirmation. "Did he say why?" "Jealousy, resentment, fear that you'd interfere with our business partnership." Malcolm's voice was ice-cold with betrayal. "He actually said he was protecting me from making the same mistake twice." The casual cruelty of reducing their love to a mistake made anger flare in Octavia's chest. "What happens now?" "Now he's no longer welcome in my company or my life." Malcolm's eyes were hard as winter stone. "I bought out his partnership interest this afternoon. He has 30 days to clear out." The swiftness of Malcolm's response shouldn't have surprised her. He'd always been decisive in business, ruthless when necessary. But seeing him choose their relationship over his oldest friendship with such finality made something warm and dangerous bloom in her chest. "Malcolm, are you sure? 15 years of friendship means nothing if he's willing to destroy the woman I love to protect his own interests." The words, "woman I love," hit Octavia like electricity, even though she knew they were true. Hearing Malcolm say it aloud with such fierce certainty made her believe for the first time that they really might make this work. But their moment of connection was interrupted by Octavia's phone ringing with her sister's panicked voice. "Octavia, you need to come to the hospital right now. Dad's taken a turn for the worse." The drive to Seattle General felt endless, Malcolm's Tesla weaving through traffic while Octavia gripped his hand like an anchor. Her father's heart surgery had been successful, but complications meant he needed another procedure their insurance wouldn't fully cover. The bills were mounting beyond anything her family could manage. "We'll figure it out," Malcolm said quietly as they rushed through the hospital corridors. "Whatever he needs, we'll handle it." "I can't let you pay for my father's medical care, Malcolm. That's not what this isn't about our arrangement anymore." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands framing her face with devastating tenderness. "This is about the woman I love facing a crisis and me having the resources to help. Let me help, Octavia." Standing in the hospital hallway with her father fighting for his life rooms away, Octavia finally understood what Malcolm had been trying to tell her 3 years ago. Love wasn't about being equals in every measurable way. It was about being willing to support each other through whatever came, using whatever strengths and resources each person brought to the partnership. "Okay," she whispered, "but as a loan, I'll pay you back." Malcolm's smile was soft with understanding, however you need to frame it. They spent the next 6 hours in the cardiac unit waiting room, surrounded by Octavia's family as her father underwent emergency surgery. Briella, her younger sister, studied Malcolm with open curiosity while their mother fretted over medical forms and insurance coverage. "You're really him," Briella said during one of their quiet moments. "The one who broke her heart." "I'm the one whose heart she broke," Malcolm corrected gently. "But we're working on healing each other now." "Good. Because if you hurt her again, I'll destroy your credit rating and post embarrassing photos of you on every social media platform that exists." Malcolm's laugh was genuinely amused. Noted and respected. When the surgeon finally emerged with news that the procedure had been successful, Octavia broke down, crying with relief. Malcolm pulled her against his chest, letting her sob out weeks of accumulated stress and fear while he stroked her hair and whispered reassurances against her temple. "He's going to be fine," the surgeon told their gathered family. "Full recovery expected, but he'll need extensive cardiac rehabilitation." As they discussed treatment plans and follow-up care, Malcolm quietly handled the financial arrangements with hospital administration. Octavia watched him through the glass office walls, noting the way he commanded respect even in his exhaustion, how he managed to be both authoritative and compassionate as he ensured her father would receive the best possible care. "He really loves you," her mother said softly, following Octavia's gaze. I can see it in how he looks at you. I love him too. I just hope we're strong enough this time to make it work. Love isn't about being strong enough, baby. It's about being brave enough to keep trying, even when you're scared. That evening, they returned to Malcolm's penthouse, emotionally drained, but connected in ways that went deeper than passion or attraction. They moved around each other with unconscious synchronization, Malcolm ordering dinner, while Octavia checked on family updates, both of them processing the day's emotional intensity. Thank you, Octavia said as they sat on his sofa sharing Chinese takeout, for everything today, for being there, for handling the hospital, for not making me feel like charity. You never have to thank me for loving you, Octavia. Malcolm set down his chopsticks and turned to face her fully. That's what partners do. They show up for each other. The word partners resonated through her chest with rightness. They weren't just fake spouses or former lovers finding their way back to each other. They were building something new and stronger, based on who they'd become rather than who they used to be. Malcolm, she began, but he silenced her with a finger against her lips. Before you say anything, I need you to know something. His dark eyes were serious, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen since they were young and reckless, and believed love could conquer anything. This morning, when Costello was questioning us, all I could think about was how much I wanted the right to protect you. Not because of immigration or business arrangements, but because you're mine and I'm yours. And that means something. Octavia's breath caught at the possessive tenderness in his voice. Malcolm, I'm not done. His thumb traced along her jawline as he spoke. I know we started this as a convenience marriage. I know we have complicated history and real problems to work through. But I also know that I don't want to spend another day pretending this isn't the most real thing in my life. The raw honesty in his confession broke down the last of Octavia's defenses. She could see her own desperate hope reflected in his eyes, the same fear that this was too good to be true mixed with the stubborn determination to fight for it anyway. I don't want to pretend either, she whispered, her hands coming up to cover his where they framed her face. I want this to be real. I want us to be real. Malcolm's smile was like dawn breaking after the longest night. Then let's stop pretending. He kissed her with reverent hunger, like a man claiming something precious he'd thought lost forever. Octavia melted against him, her body remembering the perfect fit of his mouth against hers, the way his hands could make her feel cherished and desired simultaneously. But this time, when desire threatened to overwhelm them, neither pulled away. They'd spent weeks dancing around their attraction, building walls and maintaining distance out of self-preservation. Now, finally honest about their feelings, those barriers crumbled like paper in rain. Are you sure? Malcolm asked against her lips, giving her one last chance to retreat to safety. Instead of answering with words, Octavia stood and held out her hand. The gesture was simple, but it carried the weight of complete surrender, not just to passion, but to the terrifying vulnerability of loving someone enough to risk everything again. Malcolm took her hand and followed her down the hallway, not to the guest room where she'd been sleeping, but to his bedroom with its king-sized bed and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Seattle's lights twinkled like earthbound stars as he drew her into his arms, both of them trembling with 3 years of suppressed longing. I've missed you, he murmured, his lips tracing the line of her throat where his grandmother's necklace rested. Every day, every night, every moment in between. Octavia's breath caught as his fingers found the zipper of her dress, drawing it down with aching slowness. I've missed you too. So much it felt like drowning sometimes. Their lovemaking was tender and desperate, healing and claiming, a conversation conducted in sighs and whispered endearments that said everything they'd been too afraid to speak aloud. Malcolm worshipped her body like he was mapping sacred territory, while Octavia poured 3 years of regret and love into every touch, every kiss, every breathless surrender. When morning light found them tangled together in his sheets, both naked and vulnerable in ways that had nothing to do with their lack of clothing, Octavia felt like she'd finally come home after being lost at sea. Good morning, wife, Malcolm said softly, pressing a kiss to her bare shoulder. Good morning, husband. The words felt natural now, true in ways their legal certificate had never captured. But their perfect bubble was burst by Malcolm's phone ringing with Esteban Costello's ringtone. Reality crashed back as they remembered the federal investigation that could still destroy everything they'd built. "Mr. Wimberly," Costello's voice was crisp through the speaker, "I need you and your wife at my office this afternoon. We've completed our preliminary interviews." Malcolm's arm tightened around Octavia protectively. "And? Let's discuss the results in person, 2 o'clock. After hanging up, they lay in loaded silence, both processing what this summons might mean. Immigration Services had spent the past week interviewing their friends, family, and colleagues. Diego had already done his damage with his anonymous tip. The question now was whether their real love would be enough to overcome the investigation into their fake beginning. "Whatever happens," Malcolm said finally, "we face it together." Octavia pressed her face against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Together. That afternoon, they sat across from Esteban Costello in his federal office, hands clasped tightly as he reviewed their file with unreadable expression. The silence stretched like a taut wire until Octavia thought she might scream from tension. "The investigation has been interesting," Costello began finally. "We interviewed 15 people who know you both. Your friend Diego was quite vocal about his concerns regarding the authenticity of your marriage." Malcolm's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. "However," Costello continued, "every other person we spoke with told the same story. Malcolm Wimberly has been in love with Octavia Brock since the day he met her. Octavia Brock has never stopped wearing his grandmother's necklace, even 3 years after their relationship ended. Your respective families, friends, and colleagues all described two people who belonged together, but were too stubborn or scared to admit it." Octavia's heart began to race with dangerous hope. "Most compelling was your mother's interview, Mr. Wimberly. Genevieve described watching her son come back to life since your marriage. She said, and I quote, 'Malcolm has been half a person for 3 years. With Octavia, he's whole again.' The revelation that Genevieve had defended their relationship made tears sting behind Octavia's eyes. Perhaps Malcolm's public declaration of his priorities had shifted something fundamental in his mother's perspective. "Furthermore," Costello said, consulting his notes, "our investigation into your current living situation revealed clear evidence of genuine cohabitation, shared belongings, integrated routines, the kind of domestic details that can't be fabricated for show." Malcolm's thumb traced reassuring circles on Octavia's palm as they waited for Costello's verdict. "It's my conclusion that while your marriage may have begun as a legal convenience, it has evolved into something genuine. The love between you is evident to everyone who observes you together." Relief flooded through Octavia so powerfully she felt dizzy. They had survived the investigation. Their marriage was safe. "However," Costello added, his expression growing stern, "I want to be very clear about something. Immigration fraud is a serious federal crime. If we ever discover that you've misrepresented your relationship status, the consequences will be severe." "Understood," Malcolm said firmly. "There won't be any misrepresentation." "Good. Then congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Wimberly. Your immigration status is secure." Walking out of the federal building into Seattle's gray afternoon, Octavia felt like she was floating. They'd done it, survived Diego's betrayal, passed federal scrutiny, and emerged with their love not just intact but officially recognized. "We should celebrate," Malcolm said as they reached his car. "What did you have in mind?" His smile was wicked with promise. "I thought we could start by going home and consummating our marriage properly." "We already consummated our marriage, quite thoroughly." "That was practice. This would be celebration." The heat in his voice made desire pool low in Octavia's belly, but before she could respond, her phone rang with a call that changed everything. "Miss Brock, this is Jennifer Chen from Apex Marketing Solutions. We received your business proposal and we're very interested in discussing a partnership. When could we schedule a meeting?" Octavia's eyes went wide as she recognized the name. Apex was one of Seattle's most prestigious marketing firms, the kind of client that could launch her independent agency into the stratosphere. She'd sent them a proposal weeks ago without much hope of response. "Yes, I'm very interested," she managed, trying to keep her voice professional while Malcolm grinned at her obvious excitement. After scheduling the meeting for the following week, she hung up and stared at Malcolm in amazement. "This is incredible. Apex Marketing wants to partner with me. This could be the start of everything I've dreamed of." Malcolm pulled her into his arms right there on the sidewalk, spinning her around while she laughed with pure joy. "It's not the start, Octavia. It's what you've earned through talent and hard work. I can't believe this is happening. My father's going to recover, immigration approved our marriage, and now this business opportunity." "Believe it," Malcolm said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "You deserve all of it." Standing on the sidewalk outside the federal building where they'd just proven their love was real, Octavia felt like she'd stepped into someone else's impossibly perfect life. But Malcolm's solid presence anchored her to the reality that this was her life now, complicated and wonderful and worth every risk they'd taken. "Take me home, husband," she said softly. "My pleasure, wife." 6 months later, Octavia stood in the conference room of her new marketing agency, presenting strategies to a room full of executives while Malcolm watched from the back with undisguised pride. Her business had grown beyond her wildest projections, fueled by innovative campaigns that revolutionized how companies connected with their audiences. The woman who'd once felt like an imposter in Malcolm's world now commanded her own boardroom with confidence, earned through success rather than granted through association. She wore power like perfectly tailored clothing, comfortable and natural. "Questions?" she asked after finishing her presentation. The Apex executives nodded approvingly, clearly impressed by her strategic vision. As they filed out discussing implementation timelines, Malcolm approached with the satisfied expression of a man watching his wife conquer the world. "That was brilliant," he said, pulling her into his arms for a congratulatory kiss. "You're going to revolutionize their entire market approach." "We're going to revolutionize it," Octavia corrected. "This partnership between our companies is going to change everything." They'd discovered that combining Malcolm's technological innovation with Octavia's marketing genius created something powerful enough to disrupt entire industries. Their professional partnership had become as dynamic as their personal one, built on mutual respect and complementary strengths. "Speaking of partnerships," Malcolm said, reaching into his jacket pocket with suddenly nervous energy, "I have something for you." Octavia's breath caught as he pulled out a small velvet box, not the engagement ring she'd left behind 3 years ago, but something new, chosen specifically for the woman she'd become rather than the girl she'd been. "Octavia Brock Wimberly," he said, dropping to one knee right there in her conference room. "We got married for all the wrong reasons, but we stayed married for all the right ones. Will you marry me again? This time because we choose each other, not because we need each other?" The ring was perfect. A vintage-style setting with a stunning diamond surrounded by smaller emeralds that echoed his grandmother's necklace. It was sophisticated, unique, exactly what she would have, chosen for herself. "Yes," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "Yes, I'll marry you again and again, and as many times as you want." Their wedding, their real wedding, took place on a private beach on Whidbey Island 3 months later. 50 guests gathered to watch them exchange vows they'd written themselves, promises forged in the fire of second chances and hard-won wisdom. "I promise to choose you every day," Malcolm said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Not because circumstances force us together, but because loving you is the best decision I've ever made." "I promise to stay and fight instead of running when things get complicated," Octavia replied, "because what we have is worth every challenge we'll face." When they kissed as husband and wife, for the second time, but the first time that mattered, their guests erupted in cheers that carried across the water. Even Genevieve Wimberly wiped away tears, her acceptance of Octavia complete and genuine. Diego hadn't been invited, but his absence felt like freedom rather than loss. Some friendships couldn't survive betrayal, but the relationships worth keeping had emerged stronger from the test. As they danced their first dance to the same song they'd chosen 3 years ago, Octavia marveled at the journey that had brought them back to each other. They weren't the same people who'd fallen in love over marketing strategies and shared dreams. They were better, stronger individually, and unstoppable together. "No regrets?" Malcolm asked as he spun her around the dance floor. Only one, Octavia said, smiling up at him with eyes bright with love and mischief. I regret that we had to wait so long to get it right. Malcolm's laugh was pure joy as he dipped her dramatically, kissing her thoroughly while their family and friends cheered around them. They'd started with a fake marriage that became real love. Now they had real love that would last forever. 3 years later, as Octavia watched Malcolm teach their 18-month-old daughter to walk across the living room of their new home, she reflected on the unexpected paths that led to happiness. Little Grace had inherited her father's determined spirit and her mother's expressive eyes, along with the confidence that came from being unconditionally adored. Come to Mama, Octavia called, kneeling with open arms as Grace toddled toward her on unsteady legs. Malcolm followed close behind, ready to catch their daughter if she stumbled, his love evident in every protective gesture. They'd built the family they'd once dreamed of, complete with the joy and chaos that came with raising tiny humans who thought they ruled the world. Their businesses continued to thrive, their marriage had weathered every test, and their love story had become the kind that made other people believe in second chances. Not because it was perfect, but because they'd learned to choose each other through imperfection. As Grace collapsed into Octavia's arms with delighted giggles, Malcolm settled beside them on the floor, creating a family circle that felt as natural as breathing. Outside their windows, Seattle sparkled in the distance, the city where they'd lost each other and found themselves again. Happy? Malcolm asked, his arm coming around both his girls. Octavia leaned against his shoulder, watching their daughter play with the blocks scattered across their living room floor. Their home was nothing like Malcolm's sterile penthouse or her cramped apartment. It was warm and lived in, filled with photographs and laughter and the beautiful chaos of genuine love. Perfectly, she said, meaning it completely. Have you ever gotten a second chance with someone who broke your heart? Sometimes the universe conspires to give us exactly what we need, even when we think we're just surviving. Love has a way of finding truth, even in the middle of lies we tell ourselves. What did you think of Malcolm and Octavia's journey from fake marriage to real love? Share your thoughts below. I love reading about your own second chance romance stories. Hit subscribe if this story touched your heart, and I'll see you tomorrow with another tale about love, finding a way against all odds. Until then, remember, sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the biggest risks.